Alright, so next let's look into the storage app. Now we are going to need to upload our files into iTwin storage in order to work with the storage approach. So we do need access to the iTwin storage API in addition to the Synchronization API from our application. So these are the two API pages, the Synchronization API and the iTwin storage API that we're going to be using within our app. So how exactly do we access these APIs from the app? That can be found under the clients folder. We have two clients, the storage client and the synchronization client for the respective APIs. And we generated these clients using OpenAPI. So if we go to the API pages, we can go to pretty much any command and then download the API definition. And this OpenAPI essentially allows us to generate a client for most popular programming languages and easily consume it in our code. So that's what we have here. Just to look at what these APIs end up resulting in. Under the services, you will see that we have our categories of the calls. So we have files and folders for the storage client, and authorization, connections, manifest, storage connection, source file, storage connection service for synchronization. Now these look exactly like the category structures here: authorization, connection, storage connection, source files, and files and folders for the storage API. So that's how they're categorized. And then within these services, we have the individual commands. For example, storage connection service has commands for updating a storage connection, deleting a storage connection, getting a storage connection, and of course, creating a storage connection, which is the one that we looked at in the previous chapter. Now, in terms of the content, it's exactly similar to what we saw in the API page. Takes an authorization, takes in a request body. The request body requires these parameters. We have authentication type, display name, iModel ID, source files. And the source files include the storage file ID and the connector type. Just a quick flashback here. Create storage connection. If you click try it out, we need the authorization. And then we have the body, exactly similar to what we see in the code, which is display name, iModel ID, authentication type, and source files, which include storage file ID and the connector type. So in this way, all these commands replicate exactly what we see in the API page. Now, where exactly do we consume these commands from our app? Now, all that happens in the hooks. So the hooks, as I mentioned, are the interface between the application and the API. And the two hooks are the uStorage API hook and the uSynchronization API hook. Now these files do the bulk of the work of interacting with the API. Just to recap, before we can actually use the Synchronization API, the first step is to get file identification. In this case, we're also going to have to upload our files, and all that stuff happens within the uStorage API. This has commands for creating new files in storage, for getting files information, uploading files to storage, and it uses the file service and the folder service that we see in the clients, these right here, to make this happen. The key method to look at here is upload file to storage, which takes in a file, and then it can upload the file, create the file in storage first, and then upload the contents of the file, and then also complete the file creation, and returns finally the file ID, which helps us identify the files for submitting to the Synchronization API. And then there is a uSynchronization API hook. Now this has all the methods that we see in the synchronization process, which involves creating a connection, running a connection, and then getting information or the status of the run. So you'll see methods for all these commands. There's a create storage connection for creating a connection. Again, looks exactly similar to what we see. We give it the iModel ID, give it the source files, give it the authorization. So this is all pretty much exactly what we've seen in the previous chapter. There's a command for running the connection and getting the latest run. And one more method I want to look at is get connection, which gets a connection, or it creates a connection if there isn't one that exists for the project. So you'll see it uses a create storage connection method, and it it takes in a single file, which it adds in this storage connection. Now the reason these methods are important is because they are encapsulated within this wrapper method called synchronize files, which is what the upload feature uses, where we have the drag and drop feature where we upload files and then synchronize. All that work happens in the synchronize files method. It takes in a list of files that were dragged and dropped, and then it gets or creates the connection. If a connection doesn't exist, it will create one just using the first file. Then it'll loop through all the files and add the files to the connection, and then it'll finally run the connection. The reason it's set up this way is that let's say you want to add files later to a connection that already exists, then this part is already taken care of. We just get the connection ID, and then we can add the new files to the connection and then run the connection again. And that's it. Those are the two key hooks that interact with the API. Now both these hooks culminate in the use file drop handle hook, which uses the uStorage API and uSynchronization API, and uses the upload file method that we saw, and also the synchronize files. The upload file method is a upload file to storage, which is the one that we looked at, and synchronize files is exactly the one that we saw, the wrapper method for synchronizing files. And what we simply do when we drag and drop is we call this hook and we generate a file summary for all the files that we are uploading. We upload the file, we get the file ID for that file through the upload process, and then we synchronize the files and pass in the file summary. And that's the main application logic. Now there's one more hook which we're not going to go into too much detail, but use connection file run handle is used for getting statuses of individual files to see how the synchronization process is loading and presenting that information. Now where exactly do these hooks meet with the UI? So if you go back to app.tsx, if you remember, sync view is the introductory UI component that enters us into the UI piece. So how does it tie into the UI tree? This has a component called iModelFilesTable, which in turn has a component called drag and drop. And this is the UI component that has a drag and drop functionality. And it also uses this use file drop handle hook. And then it can use the upload and synchronize functionality to finally synchronize our files. And that's how all the code ties together. Now, I know we didn't discuss individual components and go through line by line code. That's outside the scope of this video. This is just for giving you the layout of the code and understanding the core functionality, how it all ties together, and how it leverages the Synchronization API. I encourage you to study this code in your own time. And at this point, you have enough information to navigate it and start integrating it within your own application. Now in the next video, let's do a quick tour of the manifest repo as well.